The gratitude tithe was always due. Commander Eva Rostova watched the demand scroll across the main display of the UNS Principia. It was written in flawless, sterile script, the official language of the Galactic Compact. Each character was a small, elegant cage trapping a world within its legal lines. The planet Xylos, a fledgling space-faring civilization, was now formally indebted to the Cathar Dominion. The demand was not for resources or territory, but for something far more insidious. It was a tax on thankfulness, a legally binding invoice for services never requested. Rostova felt a cold anger settle in her bones, a familiar weight she had carried since humanity first stepped onto this crowded galactic stage. Her ship, a vessel of diplomacy and first contact, was now witness to a shakedown dressed in the robes of interstellar law. She knew with chilling certainty that this would end in a form of public inquiry, a star court, where precedent was both shield and sword. Her first officer, Lieutenant Commander Jax, stood beside her, his jaw tight. "They've collared another one, ma'am. The Cathar just declared Xylos a protégé world under the Gratitude Accords. The term was a vile euphemism, a legal fiction that turned vibrant worlds into cosmic serfs. The Cathar offered protection from manufactured threats, then presented a bill that could never be fully paid. It was a protection racket played out on a galactic scale sanctioned by ancient laws nobody had dared to challenge. Rostova's gaze drifted to the star chart where the Cathar Dominion's influence spread like a dark stain. They never conquered with fleets. They conquered with clauses. A debt must be named to be paid. Magister Rostova said, her voice quiet, but carrying the edge of command. Run a full analysis of the Gratitude Accords cross-referenced with the Xylan Treaty of Non-Interference they signed last cycle. Find me the loophole they are exploiting. And find me the one they left for us." The ship's integrated AI Magister responded instantly. Its voice was calm, a synthesized baritone that resonated through the command deck's internal comms. Analysis initiated, Commander. Preliminary findings suggest the Cathar are operating within established legal frameworks. Their precedents are extensive. The word extensive hung in the air, a testament to 1,000 cycles of unchallenged legal aggression. Humanity was new here, a loud and principled infant in a galaxy of ancient cynical powers. But they had learned quickly. Justice is a function of the mirror. A civilian vignette flickered on a side monitor, a live feed from Xylos's capital city. A young Xylan artist was painting a mural on a public wall, her multi-jointed limbs moving with a fluid grace. The mural depicted a sky filled with 2 suns, and now a new star, the Principia, in orbit. The Xylans were hopeful, curious, and utterly unprepared for the crushing weight of galactic law. They saw visitors. They did not yet see predators circling overhead. Rostova watched the artist for a moment, her resolve hardening. Humanity's moral line was not a suggestion. It was a boundary. That boundary was about to be tested, not by warships, but by writs and doctrines designed to bleed a world dry without firing a single shot. The ledger sees all, forgives nothing. Jax paced the deck, his unease palpable. Their method is flawless, Eva. They establish contact, offer technological and security assistance, and then invoke the unsolicited aid clauses of the compact. The target world is so grateful for the help they don't read the fine print. By the time they realize the tithe is permanent and compounding, it's too late. They are legally bound. He slammed a fist lightly against a console. It's slavery by contract. Rostova turned from the monitor, her eyes meeting his. Then we will break the contract, she stated simply. It was a declaration of war, but one that would be fought in the courts, not in the void. They would teach tyranny by the book. Magister, what is the tithe's initial demand? She asked. The AI's reply was immediate and precise. 10% of gross planetary product, Commander. Additionally, they require the ceding of intellectual property rights on all emergent technologies and the installation of a Cathar proctor to oversee gratitude compliance. They call this the collar doctrine. The name itself was an admission of its purpose. It was a chain forged from legal jargon and enforced by the threat of overwhelming force. The Cathar fleet sitting just at the edge of the system was not a vanguard. It was a notary waiting to stamp the agreement with the seal of its weapon emplacements. They wrote their laws in the shadow of their guns. Rostova's mind raced, connecting disparate threads of interstellar law. Humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its nascent military power. It was its fresh perspective, its unwillingness to accept that this is how it has always been done. The other races were too old, too entrenched in tradition, too bound by a web of ancient treaties and obligations. They saw the Cathar as a distasteful but predictable part of the galactic ecosystem. Humanity saw a bully on a playground that stretched between stars. And there was one thing humans had always understood. You don't back down from a bully. You make them answer for their actions in front of everyone. You put their method on trial. Jax open a channel to the Xylan Governing Council. Encrypt it on a diplomatic band. Inform them that the Terran Confederacy is offering its legal counsel pro bono. Her gaze was fixed on the image of the Cathar flagship, a monstrous vessel designed to intimidate. And Magister, find me every precedent related to the challenge of a protectorate's legitimacy. Dig deep. I want cases from the Dawn era if you have to. The AI's avatar. A simple pulsating sphere of light on the main view screen glowed brighter. Already searching, Commander. The Cathar have successfully defended their methods against 312 such challenges over the last 4,000 cycles. The number was staggering, a monument to their legal prowess. But it was also a weakness. The Cathar had won so often, they had forgotten how to lose. They had forgotten the terror of a truly novel argument. Before Jax could open the channel, an incoming message flashed on the console. It was from the Cathar proctor himself, a being named Valerius. The message was an invitation, cordially worded, but dripping with condescension. He invited Commander Rostova to a formal dinner aboard his vessel to celebrate the new era of cooperation with Xylos. It was a power play, a classic maneuver to isolate and co-opt potential opposition. Rostova smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. Accept the invitation, Jax, she said. Tell the proctor I look forward to a frank discussion about the true cost of gratitude. The game was afoot, and the first move would be made across a dinner table under the watchful eyes of a star fleet. The inquiry had already begun. Rostova's shuttle cut through the void, a tiny spark of silver against the immense black. Beside it loomed the Cathar dreadnought, the inviolable precedent. Its surface was a dark, non-reflective gray scarred with the insignia of 1,000 grateful worlds. Each mark was a testament to a world bound in legal chains. The ship did not bristle with visible weapons. Its menace was in its sheer oppressive scale. It was a floating courthouse and a prison in one. A collar is a promise made by a master. As she stepped onto the docking bay, Proctor Valerius was there to greet her. He was Cathar, a tall, gaunt biped with skin the color of polished obsidian. His robes were elaborate, woven with filaments that shifted color with the ambient light. He moved with an unnerving smoothness, a predator's economy of motion. Commander Rostova, he said, his voice a low, resonant purr. An honor. It is rare to meet a human so far from your turbulent home sector. The insult was subtle, a reminder of humanity's newcomer status. Rostova gave him a tight, professional smile. Proctor. The Confederacy believes in reaching out. We find it helps prevent misunderstandings. This was the language of diplomacy, where every word was a loaded weapon. Every sentence carried a potential cost. The dinner was an elaborate affair, a carefully orchestrated piece of theater. The food was exotic, the room opulent. Representatives from other compact races were present, their expressions carefully neutral. They were the audience, the silent quorum Valerius had assembled to witness her acquiescence. He wanted to show them that even the idealistic humans would bend to the weight of Cathar tradition. He spoke at length about the Dominion's role as a stabilizing force in the galaxy, a benevolent shepherd guiding younger races. He called the gratitude tithe a shared investment in mutual prosperity. Rostova listened patiently, letting him build his own cage of rhetoric. She saw the trap he was laying. He was establishing a public record of her presence, her tacit approval. "Your civilization is so passionate," Commander Valerius mused, swirling a viscous amber liquid in his glass. "You feel injustice so keenly, a charming if naive quality. You see a tithe and call it a tax. You see a protectorate and call it a prison." He leaned forward, his dark eyes fixing on hers. "But the galaxy is not a human morality play. It is a complex machine governed by laws far older than your species. The gratitude accords ensure stability. They provide a predictable path for growth." He was not just defending his actions, he was teaching his doctrine. He was explaining the collar's fit. Rostova set her own glass down, the soft click echoing in the suddenly silent room. "We are a young species, Proctor. It's true. We are still learning." She paused, letting the assembled delegates lean in. "For example, we just recently learned to read the fine print of the Galactic Compact. Section 4, Article 12, Subsection C, the Mutual Endeavor Clause. Are you familiar with it?" A flicker of something surprise annoyance crossed Valerius's face. It was an obscure piece of legislation, a relic from a more optimistic era. It stipulated that any aid given to a pre-warp or newly emergent civilization must be reciprocated in a manner that is proportionate and non-coercive. A mirror must reflect the truth of the gift. Valerius recovered quickly, a thin smile gracing his lips. "A fascinating but archaic piece of text, Commander. It has not been successfully invoked in 10,000 cycles. The burden of proof for coercion is impossibly high." He believed he was on solid ground, protected by a mountain of precedent. He was wrong. The burden of proof may be high. Rostova countered, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. "But the burden of public accounting is not. The same clause mandates a public ledger for all such endeavors. A full, transparent audit of all aid given and all tithes received." She turned her gaze to the other delegates. "I am formally requesting that the Cathar Dominion present this ledger for the world of Xylos. Let us all see the numbers. Let us see the true balance of this shared investment." The room was utterly still. Rostova had not challenged the tithe itself. She had not accused them of breaking the law. She had simply asked to see the receipts. It was a brilliant move, a legal gambit that turned the Cathar's own obsession with legalism against them. To refuse the audit would be an admission of guilt, a public declaration that they had something to hide. To accept it would be to open their books to a level of scrutiny they had never before faced. The public ledger was a mirror they could not afford to look into. Valerius's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury. The inquirer Boy was no longer a distant threat. It was here in this room, on this table. The numbers would now have their say. A small vignette from Xylos played out in Rostova's mind. A teacher in a classroom explaining the concept of debt to a group of children. She used stones to represent goods and services. A fair trade was one where both sides felt the weight of the stones was equal. The children learned that a debt repaid is a bond of trust. A debt enforced is a chain. The Cathar did not deal in trust. They dealt in chains, and Rostova was about to count every single link. The cost of tyranny is always paid in the end. The request is irregular, Commander Valerius said, his voice dangerously soft. The other delegates shifted uncomfortably. They had come for a celebration, a confirmation of the status quo. They were now witnesses to a direct challenge, one that could unravel the delicate balance of power in the sector. Rostova remained calm, her hands resting on the table. The law is the law, Proctor. Or does the Cathar Dominion believe some parts of the compact are more regular than others? She was using his own logic, his own reverence for the letter of the law as a weapon. She was forcing him to either uphold the entire compact or admit his hypocrisy. He was caught. He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching into an eternity. The festive atmosphere of the dinner had evaporated, replaced by the chill of a courtroom. Finally, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The Dominion is as always a servant of the law. We will prepare the ledger. It was a surrender, but a temporary one. He believed his lawyers could bury her in data, that his accountants could twist the numbers until they screamed. He underestimated the resolve of a species that had clawed its way to the stars on a foundation of principle. And he underestimated the analytical power of an AI like Magister. The numbers did not lie. The ledger would speak the truth. Back on the Principia, the mood was electric. Jax was grinning a rare sight. You boxed him in Eva. You used their own rules to force his hand. I've never seen a Cathar proctor so completely wrong-footed. Rostova was already at the main console, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. He's not defeated, Jax. He's angry. He's going to bury us in terabytes of obfuscated data. We need to be ready. The scale of the task was monumental. They had to analyze centuries of Cathar economic and military aid to Xylos, a process that had begun long before official first contact through proxies and covert observation. They had to assign a value to every piece of technology, every shipment of medicine, every hour of advisory consultation. They had to count the cost. Magister Rostova commanded, I am uploading the full text of the Mutual Endeavor Clause and all related precedents. I want you to build a new analytical model. Call it Project Mirror. Your task is to create a complete auditable ledger of the Cathar-Xylan relationship. Every debit, every credit. We need to show in undeniable terms the disproportionality of the gratitude tithe. The AI's light pulsed in acknowledgement. Model construction initiated, Commander. Project Mirror is operational. I will require access to the ship's full computational resources. Rostova nodded. You have them. I want this done yesterday. The ship itself seemed to hum with a new purpose. The Principia was not a warship. It was a vessel of truth. And it was about to hold a mirror up to an empire. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. A message came in from the Xylan Council. It was filled with cautious optimism, a dawning hope that they were not alone. They had granted Rostova full power of attorney to act on their behalf in the coming inquiry. They were placing their world's future in her hands. The weight of that trust was immense, a physical pressure on her shoulders. She thought of the artist, and her mural of the teacher, and her stones. This was for them. This was for every world that had been caught in the Cathar's legalistic web. The reckoning was coming. The mirror would not be denied. The first data packet from the Cathar arrived. It was, as expected, a deluge. Financial records shipping manifests, military deployment schedules. technological transfer logs, a mountain of information designed to overwhelm and confuse. Valerius was trying to win by attrition, to drown them in a sea of meaningless data points. But he had made a critical error. He had provided the raw data. He assumed no one would have the capacity or the will to sift through it. He did not understand the meticulous, relentless nature of a dedicated AI. He did not understand the burning intensity of human indignation. Magister began its work. The numbers began to tell their story. While the AI worked, Rostova and her team prepared for the public inquiry. It would be held on a neutral venue, the orbital station, Aurora Court, a place where galactic disputes were settled. Witnesses would be called, evidence presented. It was a trial in all but name. Rostova's senior legal officer, a sharp-witted woman named Anya Sharma, was preparing their opening statement. "We don't attack the law," Commander Sharma advised. "We attack their application of it. We argue that their definition of gratitude is in fact a legal term for servitude. They were not just fighting for Xylos. They were fighting to set a new precedent, one that would defang the gratitude accords for good. They were fighting to break the collar for everyone." Days turned into weeks. The Principia was a hive of activity. Magister's progress reports were projected onto the main screen, a complex, evolving web of interconnected data. The AI was finding patterns, uncovering hidden costs and inflated values. The Cathar had billed the Xylons for the fuel consumed by their protective fleet, a fleet that was actively blockading their trade routes. They had charged them for advisory services that amounted to little more than installing surveillance software. They had claimed the value of a simple water purifier was equivalent to a starship's engine core. It was systematic, predatory, and utterly damning. The truth has its own gravity. A civilian vignette from Xylos reached them, a stark contrast to the hope of before. The Cathar proctor on the planet had begun to enforce the tithe. Food shipments were being diverted off-world. Promising young scientists were being invited to Cathar research facilities, a one-way trip. The mood in the capital city was turning from hope to fear. The collar was tightening. The pressure was mounting on Rostova. She had to deliver a victory, and soon. The cost of delay was being paid by the Xylon people. Then Magister found it. Buried deep in the Cathar's own financial ledgers was a single explosive piece of information. It was a cost-benefit analysis of the Gratitude Tithe program, written by a Cathar economist centuries ago. The document laid bare the entire strategy. It described in cold, clinical detail how to manufacture a crisis, how to present the solution, and how to leverage the resulting gratitude into a perpetual economic drain. It was the blueprint for their entire empire of debt. It was the smoking gun, and it was admissible as evidence. They had counted the cost of their own cruelty. "That's it," Rostova whispered, her eyes wide as she read the translated text. "That's the whole game right there. They wrote it all down." Jack stood beside her, his expression grim. They were so arrogant they kept a record of their own evil. It was more than just a legal document. It was a confession. A confession written in the dry language of economics and profit margins. Magister's calm voice filled the bridge. "Commander, the mirror ledger is complete. I have calculated the true proportionate value of all aid rendered to Xylos by the Cathar Dominion. I have also calculated the total value extracted by the gratitude tithe to date." The numbers appeared on the screen. The Cathar had been repaid for their assistance over 300 times. The debt was a fiction. The collar was a fraud. Justice would be an equation. Rostova took a deep breath, the air in the command deck tasting of recycled oxygen and victory. Anya prepped the evidence. Jack set a course for Aurora Court. "Send a message to Proctor Valerius. Tell him the public ledger is ready for his review." She looked at the star chart, at the symbol of the Cathar dreadnought. It no longer seemed so menacing. It seemed small, an artifact of an older, crueler time. And Magister, she added a note of profound respect in her voice. Thank you. The AI's light pulsed gently. You are welcome, Commander. It is my function to count, and my honor to serve. The greatest truths are often the simplest numbers. The journey to Aurora Court was tense. Valerius sent no reply. His fleet remained in the Xylos system, a silent, brooding presence. He was not going to give up easily. He would fight this to the bitter end, using every legal trick, every procedural delay he could muster. Rostova knew this would not be a simple presentation of evidence. It would be a battle of wills, a duel of interpretations. But she had the truth on her side. She had the numbers, and she had the unwavering conviction that a law used to enslave is no law at all. A mirror held up to a monster reveals nothing but a monster. As they approached the station, a massive wheel-like structure gleaming in the light of a nebula, they received a new intelligence report. The Cathar had filed a counterclaim. They were accusing humanity of unlawful interference in a sovereign protectorate relationship. They were demanding sanctions against the Terran Confederacy. It was a desperate, transparent move, an attempt to muddy the waters and intimidate the court. But it was also an escalation. Valerius was no longer just defending his actions against Xylos. He was putting humanity on trial. The stakes had just been raised for everyone. Rostova stood on the observation deck, looking out at the vast, swirling colors of the nebula. Aurora Court was a beacon of light and law in the darkness of the void. But law was a tool. It could be used to build or to break. The Cathar had used it to break worlds for millennia. She was about to use it to build a new precedent, a new shield for the vulnerable. She thought about the artist on Xylos. She hoped she was still painting, still dreaming of new stars in the sky. Rostova was fighting to make sure those stars were signs of hope, not harbingers of debt. A debt of gratitude should be a joy, not a burden. They're trying to change the subject, ma'am, Anya Sharma said, joining her at the window. The counterclaim is pure theatrics. They want to make this about us, about our right to even be here. Rostova nodded, her gaze unwavering. Let them. Let them put humanity on the stand. Let them ask us why we interfere, why we care. She turned to face her legal officer, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. I'm looking forward to answering that question in front of the entire galaxy. I am looking forward to teaching them the meaning of a human promise. The corridor of law was waiting, and humanity was ready to walk it. Aurora Court was a city in space, a hub of galactic diplomacy. Its corridors teemed with beings from 1,000 different worlds, a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of life. The air hummed with dozens of languages, with the low thrum of the station's life support, and with a palpable sense of anticipation. The case of the Terran Confederacy versus the Cathar Dominion, with the fate of Xylos hanging in the balance, was the talk of the station. Everyone knew this was more than a simple legal dispute. It was a clash of philosophies, a battle for the soul of the Galactic Compact. It was the old way versus the new. Rostova and her team made their way to the Grand Chamber of Inquiry. The room was vast, a circular amphitheater, with seating for thousands of delegates. In the center was a raised platform where the speakers would stand. Above it, a sphere of pure energy pulsed with a soft white light, the oracle, an ancient AI that served as the court's impartial moderator and record keeper. Proctor Valerius was already there, flanked by a team of Cathar lawyers. He looked serene, confident, as if he had already won. His arrogance was a weapon designed to project an aura of inevitability. He believed the weight of history was on his side. He forgot that history is a story that is always being written. As the chamber filled, a hush fell. The oracle's voice, a chorus of 1,000,000 synthesized voices speaking, as one echoed through the space. This inquiry is now in session. The matter before this court is the legitimacy of the gratitude tithe imposed upon the world of Xylos by the Cathar Dominion. The formal language was a stark contrast to the raw emotion simmering just beneath the surface. This was not about abstract legal theory. It was about a world's freedom. Valerius's lead counsel spoke first. He was a master of rhetoric, his voice weaving a narrative of benevolence and order. He painted the Cathar as wise guardians protecting the galaxy from chaos. He portrayed the tithe as a small price to pay for the immense benefits of Cathar protection. He spoke of tradition, of stability, of the sacred nature of ancient agreements. He did not mention collars or coercion. He spoke a beautiful lie. His words were a cage gilded and ornate. Then it was humanity's turn. Anya Sharma stood her presence a stark contrast to the flamboyant Cathar. She was calm, precise, her argument built not on emotion, but on cold, hard fact. The Cathar speak of law, she began, her voice clear and strong. Let us speak of numbers, for the numbers do not have a philosophy. They do not have a tradition. They simply are. She gestured to the main display, and Magister's mirror ledger appeared, a stunningly clear, simple visualization of the complex data. It showed the Cathar's initial investment, a modest line at the bottom of the screen, and it showed the tithe, a towering, ever-growing mountain that dwarfed it. The visual was devastating in its simplicity, a picture of theft. Sharma walked the assembled delegates through the evidence. She showed them the inflated invoices, the charges for phantom services, the compounding interest designed to be impossible to repay. And then she presented the final damning piece of evidence, the Cathar's own cost-benefit analysis, the blueprint for their predatory system. She read excerpts aloud, the cold, clinical language of exploitation echoing through the silent chamber. Manufacture a crisis. Leverage the resulting gratitude. Create a perpetual economic drain. The words hung in the air, an indictment from their own mouths. The mirror was showing them their own face. Valerius's composure finally cracked. He rose to his feet, his voice shaking with rage. This is an outrage, a distortion of our benevolent intentions. This human whelp twists our words, our history, but the damage was done. The delegates were murmuring, looking at the Cathar delegation with new eyes. They had all known on some level what the Cathar did, but they had never seen it laid bare like this, proven with the Cathar's own records. They had never seen the math. The truth once seen cannot be unseen. Rostova had one more card to play. She had requested the right to question a witness. The oracle granted it. I call Proctor Valerius to the platform, she said, her voice steady. A wave of shock went through the chamber. A direct confrontation. Valerius had no choice but to comply. To refuse would be a fatal admission of weakness. He strode to the platform, his face a mask of contempt. He stood before her, the obsidian predator, ready to defend his hunt. Rostova did not ask him about the ledger. She did not ask him about the tithe. She asked him a single, simple question. Proctor Valerius, you are a student of the law. You believe in the letter of the compact. So tell this assembly what is the legal and moral distinction between a gratitude tithe and a ransom. The question was a scalpel cutting through all the legal jargon, all the rhetorical fog. It went to the heart of the matter. It demanded a moral accounting, not just a legal one. Valerius was trapped. If he admitted there was no distinction, his entire legal framework would crumble. If he tried to define the difference, he would be forced to use language that would expose the coercive nature of his system. He hesitated, his mind racing for an escape. The silence stretched a palpable thing. The entire galaxy was waiting for his answer. He had built an empire on the careful twisting of words. And now a single, simple question was about to bring it all crashing down. He had to explain the collar to those who had never worn one. He finally spoke, his voice strained. A ransom is a payment for a return. A tithe. A tithe is an expression of appreciation. The answer was weak, evasive. Rostova pressed her advantage. Appreciation for what Proctor for, not being attacked by the very fleet that is demanding the payment. Is it appreciation when it is given under the threat of force? Is a contract signed at gunpoint a contract at all? Each question was a hammer blow shattering his carefully constructed facade. The delegates were no longer neutral observers. They were a jury, and their verdict was clear in their eyes. The moral line had been crossed. A civilian vignette played on the side screens unbidden. It was the Xylan artist. She was not painting. She was standing in a crowd watching a Cathar enforcer confiscate a farmer's harvest. Her face was not filled with hope. It was filled with a quiet, burning anger. The same anger Rostova felt. The same anger that was now spreading through the grand chamber of inquiry. The anger of the just. A public ledger confirms all debts. The oracle's voice filled the chamber, cool and impartial. The evidence has been presented. The arguments have been heard. The inquiry will now deliberate. But the deliberation was a formality. The verdict was already in. Rostova had not just won a case. She had changed the law. She had held up a mirror, and the reflection had horrified the galaxy. The Cathar's empire of debt was built on a foundation of lies, and she had just pulled the cornerstone. The fall was going to be long and loud. The cost of victory was coming due. The silence in the grand chamber of inquiry was a living thing. It was a held breath, a moment of quantum uncertainty where 1,000 possible futures vied for existence. Proctor Valerius stood frozen on the platform, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. He had been asked to define his life's work, and in doing so had been forced to confess its rotten core. The delegates of the Galactic Compact, who for centuries had turned a blind eye to the Cathar's methods, could no longer feign ignorance. Rostova had not merely presented evidence, she had forced a moral reckoning. A law without a soul is just a weapon. The oracle's voice, devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of finality, broke the stillness. Deliberation is complete. The findings of this inquiry are threefold. Every eye was fixed on the pulsating sphere of light. First, the gratitude tithe imposed upon Xylos is found to be disproportionate, coercive, and in violation of the Mutual Endeavor Clause. The contract is declared null and void. A collective gasp swept through the chamber. It was a direct repudiation of millennia of Cathar legal precedent. Valerius took an involuntary step back, as if struck by a physical blow. The cage of his own making had just snapped shut. Second, the oracle continued its voice unwavering. The Cathar. Dominion is ordered to make full restitution for all assets and resources extracted from Xylos under the voided tithe. The value of this restitution will be determined by the public ledger submitted by the UNS Principia, authenticated and mirrored by this court. Rostova felt a surge of triumph, sharp and clean. It was not just a legal victory, it was restorative justice. The mirror would not just show the crime, it would correct it. The ledger would be balanced. Third, the oracle concluded, and this was the blow that would shake an empire. A moratorium is placed upon the invocation of the Gratitude Accords pending a full review by the Compact Assembly. A precedent is now set: any aid rendered under threat, explicit or implicit, shall be considered aggression and its associated contracts unenforceable. The chamber erupted. Delegates were on their feet, some cheering, others in stunned silence. The Cathar's primary tool of empire had just been shattered. They had built a throne of paper, and humanity had just set it on fire with a single undeniable truth. Tyranny's greatest fear is a well-kept record. Valerius turned his obsidian eyes, locking with Rostova's across the chamber. There was no civility left, no pretense of diplomatic decorum. What she saw in his gaze was pure, unadulterated hatred. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was not a gesture of defeat. It was a promise. A promise that this was not over. The court had spoken, but the fleet still waited. He strode from the chamber, his lawyers trailing in his wake, like shadows leaving a chill in the air. The inquiry was finished. The conflict was about to begin. Aboard the Principia, the mood was one of controlled elation. Shouts of victory echoed through the corridors. Jax clapped Rostova on the shoulder, his face split by a wide grin. "You did it, Ava. You actually did it. You took on the Cathar in their own arena and beat them bloody with their own rulebook." But Rostova was already looking at the tactical display. The Cathar fleet in the Xylos system had not moved. If anything, their energy signatures were rising. They were not preparing to leave. They were digging in. A verdict is only a wish until it is enforced. "They're not complying, Jax," she said, her voice cutting through the celebratory atmosphere. "The court's ruling means nothing if they refuse to honor it." Anya Sharma joined them, her expression sober. "They are legally bound to comply, Commander. To defy a ruling from Aurora Court is to declare themselves a rogue state. The political fallout would be catastrophic." Rostova shook her head. "The Cathar don't think in terms of political fallout. They think in terms of leverage. They're calling our bluff. They know the compact doesn't have the military will to enforce its own rulings. They're daring us to make them leave. The real cost of justice is the will to see it done." A civilian vignette from Xylos appeared on a secondary screen. The news from Aurora Court had reached the planet. There were scenes of joyful celebration in the streets. The artist Rostova had seen before was surrounded by a crowd, and she was adding a new element to her mural. A stylized human figure holding up a glowing sphere of light, shielding a grateful Xylon. The hope was back brighter than ever. But it was a fragile hope, ignorant of the warships still hanging in its sky. Rostova felt a fresh pang of responsibility. She had made them a promise. She had to see it through. "Magister Rostova," said, her voice resonating with command, "the court has authenticated your mirror ledger. It is now legally binding. Is it possible to automate the restitution process?" The AI's light pulsed thoughtfully. "The court's verdict provides the legal authority, Commander. Aurora Court's network is powerful enough to issue writs of seizure against Cathar financial accounts held within compact member systems. We can establish a trust account for Xylos and begin transferring the exact amount owed." Magister paused, its processing cycles almost audible. However, such an action, a direct system-scale seizure of assets, is unprecedented. It would be a significant escalation. It was the maneuver she had been holding in reserve. Not just a ledger, but a weaponized accounting system. A way to return the cost directly bypassing the Cathar's intransigence. They are the ones who escalated Magister by refusing to withdraw their fleet. They are holding a world hostage. She turned to Jax. "They think we're just diplomats and lawyers. They've forgotten we're the same species that fought its way out of its own gravity well with chemical rockets and sheer bloody-mindedness." A new fire was in her eyes. The fire of a commander, not just a diplomat. The reckoning would be delivered. Prepare the transfer protocols, Magister, but do not execute them yet. Give me a direct channel to Proctor Valerius. He's on his flagship at Xylos. It's time to present him with the final bill. The request was a formality. Magister already had the channel open. Valerius's face appeared on the main screen. He was on the bridge of the inviolable precedent, and the fury in his eyes had cooled into something far more dangerous, a cold, resolved certainty. He had made his decision. Commander Rostova, he began, his voice dripping with venom. You have won your little victory in court. You have impressed the doddering fools of the compact with your histrionics. Now you will learn the difference between a ruling and reality. My fleet is not leaving. Xylos is and will remain a Cathar protectorate. He was openly defying the highest court in the galaxy. He was gambling that no one had the courage to stop him. He was making his last stand on the line of his own arrogance. The court has declared your protectorate illegal, Proctor. Rostova replied calmly, her own face a mask of iron control. Your continued presence in the Xylos system is now an act of illegal occupation. Your fleet is trespassing. As of this moment, every minute you remain, you incur further damages against the people of Xylos. We are, of course, keeping a tally. On a screen beside Valerius's image, she had Magister project a live counter, the numbers already ticking upwards, calculating the cost of fuel personnel hours and the implicit economic blockade his fleet represented. It was a receipt for his crime delivered in real time. The ledger never sleeps. Valerius laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Your numbers are meaningless. Your threats are hollow. You have a single insignificant ship. I have a battle fleet. This conversation is over. He was about to cut the channel, but Rostova spoke again, her voice stopping him cold. I am not the one you should be worried about, Proctor. My ship is not your enemy today. She paused for effect. Your accountants are. Magister, she commanded, her voice ringing through the Principia's bridge, execute the writ. On the main screen, a new window opened. It was a complex, beautiful visualization of the Galactic financial network. A single command originating from Aurora Court, but routed through the Principia, flashed across the web. And then it began. Hundreds, then thousands of Cathar Dominion accounts across the galaxy began to drain. The funds were not vanishing. They were being rerouted with perfect audited transparency into a new account labeled Xylan Restitution Fund. Every transaction was logged, time-stamped, and broadcast on a public channel for the entire galaxy to see. It was a bloodless coup, a war fought with finance instead of phasers. A mirror reflects all light, even the light of currency. On the bridge of the inviolable precedent, Valerius watched in horror as red alerts flashed across his own consoles. It was not a military attack, but it was just as devastating. His logistics officers were screaming about frozen fuel allocations. His quartermasters were reporting that their lines of credit had been severed. The vast, intricate financial machine that powered the Cathar military was grinding to a halt, seized by an accounting protocol they could not countermand. To block it would be to block the Galactic financial network itself, an act of economic suicide. Rostova had not attacked his fleet. She had repossessed it. The cost of hubris is a debt that is always called in. Valerius stared at the screen at Rostova's impassive face. He saw now that he had fundamentally misunderstood his enemy. He had prepared for a war of ships and laws. He had not prepared for a war of numbers. He had seen humanity's passion as a weakness, not as the fuel for a relentless analytical fire. He had been so focused on the letter of the law that he had forgotten its purpose to deliver justice. Justice was now being delivered one credit at a time. The numbers were teaching him a lesson he would never forget. Rostova let him watch for a full minute as his empire's wealth was systematically redistributed. "Your fleet runs on credits, Proctor," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the force of a tectonic shift. "Those credits are now being used to pay the debt you incurred. You can remain in Xylos's sky for as long as you like, but soon you will not have the fuel to power your shields, your life support, or your engines. The choice is yours. Leave now under your own power or be towed away as salvage when your funds run dry." She was offering him a way out, a chance to save face, but they both knew it was a surrender. A surrender forced not by a cannon, but by a calculator. The collar was broken, and its price was being returned to its victims. The rage on Valerius's face was supplanted by a slow, dawning wave of utter defeat. He looked around his own bridge at the panicked faces of his officers at the flashing red lights that signaled the end of his career, the end of an era. He had played the game for centuries and had never lost. Now he had lost everything to a species of upstarts who fought with ledgers and believed in the radical idea that debts should be fair. He closed his eyes, a brief final admission of the truth. Then he opened them and gave the order he never thought he would utter. Helm set a course out of this system. Now. An empire can be measured by its balance sheet. On the main screen of the Principia, the Cathar warships, one by one, turned and began to move away from Xylos. Their energy signatures were fluctuating, a clear sign of the financial strangulation they were experiencing. They were wounded animals slinking away from a battle they had lost before it had even begun. Rostova watched them go, a profound sense of exhaustion and triumph washing over her. She had held the line. She had fulfilled her promise. The channel to Xylos was open. The council members were weeping with joy. The sounds of celebration from the planet's surface filled the bridge. The artist's mural was now complete. The human figure stood tall, the sphere of light in her hand, no longer just a shield, but a radiant sun banishing the shadows. It was a new dawn for their world, a dawn bought with courage, conviction, and the cold, hard logic of a mirror ledger. Justice is not a gift, it is a reckoning. But victory was not without its price. A priority message came in from Terran Confederacy High Command. It was a commendation praising Rostova for her unorthodox but effective resolution of the crisis. But buried in the text was a single line that stung more than any weapon could. In the interest of de-escalating diplomatic tensions with other established powers, Lieutenant Commander Jax is to be reassigned to a training billet effective immediately. It was a political sacrifice. Jax, with his open and honest disdain for the Cathar's methods, was being offered up as a scapegoat to appease the factions who were terrified of humanity's new aggressive legal posture. He had stood by her, but he would not stand with her in the aftermath. The cost of changing the world is that the world changes you with it. Jax took the news with a grim stoicism. Someone had to take the heat. "Ava," he said, packing his personal effects in his quarters. "You kicked over the whole table. The old powers are scared. They needed a gesture. I'm that gesture." Rostova felt a pang of guilt, a sense that she had failed him. "It's not right, Jax." He paused, turning to face her. "No, it's not. But it's necessary. You did the right thing. Never doubt that. You taught them that humanity's line is not a negotiation. That's a lesson worth a hell of a lot more than my career." He offered a small, sad smile. "Go give 'em hell, Commander. A promise kept often means another must be broken." The second cost was less personal, but far broader. The Cathar dominion, though publicly humiliated and financially wounded, was not destroyed. They had recalled their ambassadors from Terra. They had declared a trade embargo. They had branded the Terran Confederacy a rogue state, an enemy of galactic stability. Humanity had won the battle for Xylos, but they had started a new Cold War with one of the galaxy's oldest and most ruthless powers. The galaxy was now a more dangerous place for every human ship, every human colony. The price of principle is eternal vigilance. Days later, back at Aurora Court, Rostova stood as a witness to the final act. On the main screen in the now empty Grand Chamber, she watched the official Galactic Compact public ledger. A clerk, an ancient multi-limbed being, whose species had been recording the law since before humanity had discovered fire, made the final entry. The moratorium on the Gratitude Accords was made permanent. A new precedent was formally entered into the legal codex. It was named for all time the Rostova precedent. It legally defined coercive contracts and established the principle of proportional auditable aid. It was a shield for every emerging world, a permanent change to the galactic landscape. The ledger entry blinked once, then settled into the steady, unchanging glow of established law. Confirmed. The mirror was now a permanent part of the legal system. Rostova stood alone on the observation deck of the Principia, the ship quiet around her. The stars of the nebula outside painted the viewport with impossible colors. She had won. Xylos was free. A great evil had been given a name and brought to justice. But the victory felt heavy. She thought of Jax, of the new dangers facing her people. Justice was not an end state. It was a process, a constant, difficult struggle. It was a matter of counting the costs of holding the line and of tending the ledger day after day. A debt is a story. The best stories are the ones where the bill is finally truly paid. The mirror shows you what you are not, what you wish to be.